Thomas Blackwood tightened his grip on the wheel of his rusty old truck as it rattled down the narrow, winding road that led to his new home. The lighthouse stood at the end of the path, a solitary sentinel on the edge of a jagged cliff, overlooking the restless ocean. As he approached, the sea breeze carried a faint scent of salt and decay, mingling with the oppressive silence that surrounded the place. He parked the truck and stepped out, taking a moment to absorb the scene. The lighthouse was taller than he had imagined, its white and red stripes faded and chipped by the relentless assault of the elements. The windows, dark and uninviting, stared back at him like vacant eyes. Despite the bright afternoon sun, an unshakable chill ran down his spine. Thomas grabbed his bags and headed toward the small cottage adjacent to the lighthouse, the keeper's quarters. The door creaked open, revealing a cozy yet eerily preserved interior. Dust motes floated lazily in the slanted sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. A large wooden desk dominated the main room, cluttered with nautical charts, old books, and a brass oil lamp. Setting his bags down, Thomas took a deep breath and tried to shake off the unease that had settled over him since his arrival. He was here for a fresh start, far away from the chaos of city life and the painful memories he had left behind. Being a lighthouse keeper was a solitary job, but that was precisely what he needed. As he explored the cottage, he found a spiral staircase leading to a small bedroom and bathroom on the upper floor. The bed was neatly made, and a thick layer of dust covered the furniture, indicating that the place had been unoccupied for some time. After unpacking his belongings, Thomas made his way back downstairs and noticed an old, leather-bound logbook on the desk. Curiosity piqued. He opened it. The logbook contained entries from previous keepers, some dating back several decades. Most of the entries were mundane, detailing weather conditions and routine maintenance tasks. However, as he flipped through the pages, he found passages that were more cryptic and unsettling. June 14th, 1952. The whispers returned last night. Can't tell if it's the wind or something more sinister. Must keep the beacon lit. October 3rd, 1967. Saw a figure on the rocks today. Went to investigate, but there was no one there. I can feel them watching me. March 22nd, 1985. Another storm, another wreck. The cries of the lost sailors haunt my dreams. How much longer can I endure this? Thomas closed the logbook with a shudder. Local legends and ghost stories were to be expected in a place like this, but the sense of dread that seeped from those pages felt all too real. Shaking his head, he reminded himself that he was a rational man. Ghosts and spirits were the stuff of folklore, not something to be feared in the light of day. Determined to focus on his duties, Thomas decided to inspect the lighthouse itself. He stepped outside, the wind tugging at his clothes as he made his way to the towering structure. The heavy wooden door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled of damp and decay. The spiral staircase wound upwards, disappearing into the darkness above. With each step, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence pressed in around him. His footsteps echoed off the stone walls, a stark reminder of his solitude. As he reached the top, the beacon room came into view. The massive, rotating lens dominated the space, its intricate machinery lying dormant. Dust-covered windows offered a panoramic view of the tumultuous sea below. Thomas walked over to the lens and inspected it, noting that it needed a thorough cleaning. He was about to start when a sudden movement caught his eye. He turned sharply, peering into the shadows, but saw nothing. His heart pounded in his chest as he told himself it was just a trick of the light. Still, a nagging feeling of being watched refused to leave him. Determined to shake it off, he set to work, focusing on the task at hand. As he cleaned the lens and checked the machinery, the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the rocks below provided a strangely soothing backdrop. Nightfall came swiftly, and with it, the weight of loneliness settled over Thomas. He returned to the cottage, lighting the oil lamp on the desk as darkness enveloped the room. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and adding to the growing sense of unease. Sitting at the desk, Thomas opened the logbook once more, reading the final entries of the most recent keeper. The last passage, dated over a year ago, was barely legible, scrawled in a frantic hand. May 5th, 2023. They won't let me leave. I hear their cries, see their faces. I must keep the light burning, but I'm losing my mind. God help me. A chill ran through Thomas as he read the words. What had driven the previous keeper to such desperation? He closed the logbook and rubbed his temples, trying to banish the dark thoughts. Tomorrow he would visit the nearby village and speak with the locals, perhaps learn more about the lighthouse's history. For now, he needed rest. Climbing the stairs to his bedroom, he felt the oppressive silence of the cottage weigh heavily upon him. As he lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in his mind. Exhaustion eventually pulled him into a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of shadowy figures and mournful cries. The lighthouse stood tall against the night, its darkened beacon a silent testament to the countless lives it had witnessed, and the secrets it held within its ancient walls. The morning light streamed through the grimy windows of the keeper's quarters, casting an eerie glow over the room. Thomas woke with a start, the remnants of unsettling dreams clinging to the edges of his mind. He shook his head, trying to dispel the images of shadowy figures and ghostly whispers. After a quick breakfast of bread and cheese, he decided to explore the cottage more thoroughly. The previous night's unease had left him too tired to do more than glance around, but now he felt a need to familiarize himself with his new home. The main room, dominated by the large wooden desk, had an old-world charm to it. Nautical charts and faded maps covered the walls, and a worn leather armchair sat in one corner. He noticed a few personal items left behind by previous keepers: an old pipe, a pair of reading glasses, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. Thomas opened the box, revealing a collection of yellowed letters. He picked one up and began to read. The letters were filled with mundane details of daily life, but there were occasional mentions of strange happenings. One letter caught his attention. Dear Margaret, the nights grow longer, and the silence more oppressive. I feel as though the very walls whisper secrets in the darkness. The light must stay lit, for the sake of those at sea, and for my own sanity. Yours always, Henry. A shiver ran down Thomas's spine. He set the letter aside and continued his exploration. The kitchen was small and functional, with an old-fashioned stove and a well-worn table. Cupboards held an assortment of canned goods and dried provisions, enough to last through the winter months. The bathroom was similarly outdated, with a clawfoot tub and a cracked porcelain sink. The upstairs bedroom was sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a wardrobe, and a small nightstand. Thomas opened the wardrobe, finding a few moth-eaten clothes and a heavy woolen coat. As he returned to the main room, he noticed a trapdoor in the floor near the staircase. Curiosity piqued. He pried it open and peered into the darkness below. A wooden ladder led down into a small cellar, filled with old storage crates and a few pieces of broken furniture. The air was damp and musty, and the sound of dripping water echoed faintly. Among the clutter, he found a stack of old journals, their covers stained and pages brittle with age. He carefully picked one up and opened it. The handwriting was neat but faded, the ink barely legible in places. As he read, a pattern began to emerge. Each journal detailed the lives of the lighthouse keepers, their struggles with isolation, and their encounters with the inexplicable. One entry stood out. August 9th, 1974. The fog rolled in thick and heavy last night. Heard the voices again, calling from the rocks. Tried to ignore them, but they grow louder each time. I fear I am not alone here. Thomas closed the journal and replaced it carefully. The sense of unease that had settled over him since his arrival intensified. The stories, the warnings, the cryptic messages, they all painted a picture of a place steeped in mystery and haunted by its past. Determined to distract himself, Thomas decided to tackle the lighthouse's maintenance. He gathered his tools and headed outside, the sea breeze biting at his skin. The lighthouse loomed above him, its beacon still dark and silent. He climbed the spiral staircase, each step echoing in the confined space. In the beacon room, he set to work cleaning the lens and checking the machinery. The task was laborious but necessary, and it gave him a sense of purpose. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of his vision, and the air grew colder despite the warmth of the day. By the time he finished, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Thomas lit the beacon, watching as the powerful light cut through the encroaching darkness. For a moment, he felt a sense of accomplishment, but it was quickly overshadowed by the creeping dread that had become all too familiar. Back in the keeper's quarters, Thomas prepared a simple dinner and sat at the desk to eat. The logbook lay open, its pages a silent reminder of the lighthouse's grim history. He turned to a fresh page and made his first entry. July 18th, 2024. Arrived at the lighthouse. Strange occurrences already. Must keep the light burning. The past feels ever present here. As he wrote, the wind howled outside, and the cottage creaked in response. The night was settling in, bringing with it the oppressive silence that Thomas was beginning to dread. He finished his meal and extinguished the oil lamp, climbing the stairs to his bedroom. Lying in bed, he listened to the sounds of the night, the waves crashing against the rocks, the wind rattling the windows, and the faint, almost imperceptible whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams once again filled with shadowy figures and mournful cries. The lighthouse stood as a beacon of light against the darkness, but within its walls, the shadows of the past loomed ever larger. And Thomas, the new keeper, felt the weight of those shadows pressing down on him, as if the spirits of the lost sailors were watching, waiting. The night was colder than Thomas expected for mid-July. As he lay in bed, the cottage around him creaked and groaned, the old wood settling in the wind. He pulled the blankets tighter around himself, trying to ignore the unsettling sounds and focus on sleep. But sleep was elusive. The whispers began as soon as he closed his eyes, faint at first, like the distant murmur of the sea. He tried to tell himself it was just the wind, but the voices grew more distinct, forming words he couldn't quite understand. He sat up, heart pounding. The room was pitch dark, save for the sliver of moonlight filtering through the dusty window. The whispers seemed to swirl around him, growing louder and more insistent. Determined to find the source, Thomas got out of bed and grabbed the lantern from the nightstand. He lit it with trembling hands, the warm glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. The whispers faded momentarily, only to return with renewed intensity. He descended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath his weight. The main room was filled with shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of the lantern's light. Thomas moved slowly, straining to hear any clues in the disembodied voices. The whispers led him to the desk where the old logbook lay open. As he approached, the pages rustled as if caught in a breeze, though the air was still. He stared at the book, the words swimming before his eyes. Then something caught his attention. There was a new entry. July 19th, 2024. You are not alone. We are here. We see you. We need you. Thomas recoiled, nearly dropping the lantern. He hadn't written that. The ink was fresh, glistening in the dim light. His heart raced as he backed away from the desk, the whispers growing louder, more desperate. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. He stood there for what felt like hours, the silence pressing in on him, waiting for a response that never came. Finally, he turned and hurried back up the stairs, the lantern flickering wildly in his shaking hand. Back in his bedroom, he bolted the door and crawled into bed, pulling the covers over his head like a child hiding from the monsters in his closet. The whispers didn't return, but the oppressive feeling of being watched remained. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures and mournful cries. When morning finally came, Thomas felt as though he hadn't slept at all. He dragged himself out of bed and dressed quickly, determined to shake off the lingering fear. The cottage was eerily quiet, the events of the night before feeling like a distant nightmare. He needed answers. The local fishermen had mentioned tales of shipwrecks and restless spirits. Perhaps the village would hold more clues to the mystery of the lighthouse and its haunted past. Thomas grabbed his coat and headed out into the brisk morning air. The lighthouse stood silent and imposing against the clear blue sky, a stark contrast to the terror it held within its walls. He set off down the path towards the village, hoping to find some respite from the isolation and a way to put the whispers to rest. The path wound through the rocky coastline, the sea crashing against the cliffs below. As he walked, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced back at the lighthouse, its beacon now silent and dark in the daylight. Reaching the village, he found it to be a quaint, picturesque place, with narrow cobblestone streets and cozy cottages. The villagers were friendly enough, but there was a wariness in their eyes when he mentioned the lighthouse. An old man sitting on a bench by the harbor caught Thomas's attention. His weathered face and piercing blue eyes suggested he had seen more than his fair share of storms and shipwrecks. Thomas approached him, hoping for some answers. "Excuse me, sir," Thomas began. "I'm the new lighthouse keeper. I was hoping you could tell me more about the history of the place." The old man looked him over, then nodded slowly. "Name's Eli," he said. "Been fishing these waters all my life. That lighthouse, it's got a dark past, no doubt." Thomas sat down beside him, eager to hear more. "I've heard whispers and seen things. What happened there?" Eli sighed deeply. "Many a ship has wrecked on those rocks, especially in the storms. Some say the light would go out at the worst possible times, leading them to their doom. The spirits of the sailors, they don't rest easy. They blame the keepers, you see." Thomas shivered. "But why? It wasn't their fault." Eli shook his head. "Blame doesn't always follow reason, son. Those spirits are trapped, bound to the place of their death. They seek peace, but they also seek vengeance." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "What can I do?" Eli looked him in the eye, his gaze intense. "Keep the light burning no matter what. And remember, the past isn't as distant as it seems. Those who forget are doomed to repeat it." With those cryptic words, Eli stood and walked away, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. He returned to the lighthouse, the weight of his responsibilities heavier than ever. As the sun set, he lit the beacon, the light cutting through the encroaching darkness. The whispers began again as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, but this time, they were clearer, more insistent. The spirits were reaching out, seeking something from him. And as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was now a part of the lighthouse's grim history, bound to it as surely as the spirits of the lost sailors. The night stretched on, filled with the echoes of the past, and Thomas knew that his first night was only the beginning of the horrors to come. The next morning, Thomas woke with a sense of purpose. The encounter with Eli had stirred a determination within him to uncover the full story behind the lighthouse and the restless spirits that haunted it. After a quick breakfast, he set out for the village once more, hoping to gather more information from the locals. The village was bustling with activity as fishermen prepared their boats and merchants set up stalls. Thomas made his way to the small pub near the harbor, a place he had noticed the day before. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chill of the lighthouse. The scent of ale and roasted meat filled the air, and the low hum of conversation created a comforting background noise. Thomas approached the bar, where the barkeep, a stout woman with a kind face, was busy polishing glasses. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I'm Thomas, the new lighthouse keeper. I'm hoping to learn more about the history of the lighthouse and the shipwrecks." The barkeep raised an eyebrow, a hint of sympathy in her eyes. "Morning, Thomas. I'm Mary. You've taken on quite the responsibility. The lighthouse, it's a place of many stories. Not all of them are happy ones. Why don't you sit down? I'll get you a drink, and we can talk." Thomas thanked her and took a seat at a small table near the window. Mary soon joined him, setting down a mug of ale. "So, what exactly do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything," Thomas replied. "I need to understand what happened there and why the spirits are so restless." Mary nodded slowly. "It's a long and tragic history. The lighthouse was built over a century ago, meant to guide ships safely through the treacherous waters. But something went wrong. Over the years, there have been countless shipwrecks, usually during the worst storms. The light would go out, and ships would crash against the rocks. Many lives were lost." She paused, taking a sip of her own drink. "The locals believe the lighthouse is cursed. They say the spirits of the sailors who died in those wrecks are trapped there, seeking revenge on the keepers who failed to save them." Thomas leaned in, his interest piqued. "But why would the light go out? Was it sabotage or just bad luck?" Mary shook her head. "No one knows for sure. Some say it's the spirits themselves causing the light to fail out of spite. Others think there's something more sinister at play. But whatever the cause, every keeper who has worked there has experienced things." "Things?" Thomas echoed, feeling a chill. "Strange occurrences," Mary explained. "Whispers in the night, apparitions, and a feeling of being watched. Some keepers went mad, others disappeared without a trace. The last keeper, old George, was found dead at the base of the lighthouse. They say he fell, but some believe he was pushed by unseen hands." Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. "And the logbook. It mentions the voices, the cries of the lost sailors." Mary nodded again. "Aye, that's right. The logbook is a record of their torment. Each keeper has added to it, trying to make sense of the madness, but none have succeeded. The spirits are bound to the lighthouse, and they won't rest until they find peace. Or vengeance." Thomas took a deep breath, absorbing the weight of Mary's words. "Is there anything I can do to help them find peace?" Mary sighed, her expression turning somber. "I wish I knew. Some say a proper burial at sea might help, but others think it's more complicated than that. You'd need to communicate with the spirits, understand their pain, and find a way to set them free. As Thomas sat back, contemplating the enormity of his task, the door to the pub swung open, and Eli walked in. He spotted Thomas and made his way over, a grave look on his face. "Eli," Thomas greeted him. "Mary's been telling me about the lighthouse and the shipwrecks. I need to know more." Eli nodded, pulling up a chair. "Aye, it's a dark tale. There was one wreck in particular that stands out. The Mary Celeste, a grand ship that went down during a terrible storm. The lighthouse failed that night, and all hands were lost. The captain, a man named William Blake, was a respected figure in these parts. His spirit is said to be the most restless of them all." Thomas listened intently as Eli continued. "Captain Blake was a proud man, devoted to his crew and his ship. When the light went out, he must have known they were doomed. His final moments were filled with terror and helplessness. It's his voice you hear the most, calling out in the night, seeking answers, seeking justice." Mary leaned forward. "There are old records in the village archives, letters from the families of those lost at sea. Maybe they'll give you more insight into what happened and how you might help the spirits find peace." Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, both of you. I'll visit the archives and see what I can find." With a sense of determination, Thomas finished his drink and left the pub, heading toward the village archives. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. As he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the spirits of the lost sailors were aware of his quest and were waiting for him to uncover the truth. The archives were located in a small, unassuming building near the center of the village. Inside, it was dim and musty, filled with rows of shelves stacked high with old documents and books. An elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes greeted him from behind a wooden desk. "Good evening," she said. "Can I help you?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, I'm Thomas Blackwood, the new lighthouse keeper. I'm looking for records related to the shipwrecks and the lighthouse's history." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Ah, the lighthouse. A place of many sorrows. Follow me. I think I know where to find what you need." She led him to a back room filled with boxes of old letters, journals, and official documents. "These are the records you're looking for. Take your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be at my desk." Thomas thanked her and began sifting through the boxes. He found letters from families mourning their lost loved ones, official reports on the shipwrecks, and journals from previous keepers. The stories painted a picture of heartbreak and tragedy, of lives cut short by the unforgiving sea and the mysterious failures of the lighthouse. One letter stood out, written by Captain Blake's widow. "My dearest William, I pray that your soul finds peace, though I fear it may be bound to the place of your death. Know that I love you still, and that I will seek to understand what happened on that fateful night. Perhaps one day the truth will be known, and you can rest." As he read the words, Thomas felt a profound sadness. The spirits were not just angry. They were lost, yearning for closure. He realized that his task was not only to keep the light burning, but also to uncover the truth and help these restless souls find the peace they deserved. With a heavy heart, Thomas left the archives and returned to the lighthouse. The night was falling, and the whispers were already beginning to stir in the darkness. As he lit the beacon and watched its light pierce the night, he felt a sense of resolve. He would not abandon his post or the spirits that haunted it. He would find a way to set them free. The lighthouse stood as a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness, but within its walls, The echoes of the past lingered, waiting for the day they could finally rest. And Thomas, the new keeper, knew that his journey was only just beginning. Night had fallen by the time Thomas returned to the lighthouse, his mind heavy with the stories and the weight of his newfound responsibilities. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, creating an eerie symphony that set his nerves on edge. He climbed the spiral staircase to the beacon room, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The light from the beacon swept across the sea, cutting through the darkness like a knife. As he stared out at the churning waves, Thomas thought he saw movement on the rocks below. Squinting, he tried to focus, but the shadows seemed to shift and dance, elusive and ghostly. He descended to the main room and sat at the desk, the logbook open before him. The whispers began again, faint and distant, like echoes from another world. He tried to concentrate on the task at hand, but the voices grew louder, more insistent. "We see you. We need you." Thomas looked up, his heart pounding. The room was empty, yet the whispers persisted, filling the air with an otherworldly presence. He stood and walked to the window, peering out into the night. The moonlight cast long, twisted shadows across the rocky shore. Then, he saw them. Ghostly figures, barely discernible, moved along the rocks. Their forms were translucent, shimmering like mist in the moonlight. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as he watched them, feeling a mix of fear and sorrow. These were the spirits of the sailors, the lost souls who haunted the lighthouse. One figure stood apart from the rest, his outline more defined. A tall man in a tattered captain's uniform, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and despair. Thomas knew without a doubt that this was Captain William Blake, the most restless spirit of them all. The captain's eyes seemed to lock onto Thomas, a silent plea for help that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Thomas felt a surge of determination. He had to find a way to communicate with them, to understand their pain and help them find peace. Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped outside into the cold night air. The wind whipped around him, carrying the faint echoes of the spirits' cries. He made his way down the path to the rocky shore, each step filled with trepidation. As he approached the rocks, the apparitions grew clearer, their ghostly forms almost solid in the moonlight. Captain Blake stood at the forefront, his eyes never leaving Thomas. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices blending into a haunting melody. "Why did you let us die?" the voices seemed to ask. "Why did the light go out?" Thomas stood before them, his heart heavy with the weight of their sorrow. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice trembling. "I want to understand what happened and help you find peace." The spirits wavered, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. Captain Blake stepped forward, his expression one of profound sadness. "The light," he said, his voice echoing in Thomas's mind. "The light failed us. We were doomed." Thomas nodded, feeling the captain's pain. "I'm trying to uncover the truth," he said. "I've read the logbooks, spoken with the villagers. There's something more to this, something I need to understand." The captain's eyes seemed to soften, a glimmer of hope flickering within their depths. "Find the truth," he said. "Only then can we be free." The other spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the night. Captain Blake lingered a moment longer, his gaze fixed on Thomas. "Do not fail us," he whispered, before disappearing into the darkness. Thomas stood alone on the rocks, the weight of his task pressing down on him. He knew now that his role as the lighthouse keeper was not just to keep the light burning, but to uncover the truth behind the tragedies that had befallen the sailors. As he made his way back to the lighthouse, The whispers subsided, replaced by a heavy silence. He climbed the stairs to the beacon room, the light casting long shadows on the walls. Sitting at the desk, he made another entry in the logbook. July 20th, 2024. The spirits appeared tonight. They seek the truth behind their deaths. I must find a way to help them. Exhausted, Thomas lay down on his bed, the events of the night replaying in his mind. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of shipwrecks and ghostly figures. He awoke before dawn, determined to continue his quest. The first light of day cast a pale glow over the lighthouse as Thomas set out for the village once more. He needed to speak with Eli and Mary again, to gather more information and piece together the puzzle of the lighthouse's dark past. As he walked, the whispers of the spirits seemed to follow him, a constant reminder of his mission. The lighthouse loomed behind him, a silent sentinel watching over the sea. And Thomas, the new keeper, felt the weight of its history bearing down on him, knowing that the fate of the restless spirits depended on his success. The journey ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Thomas was resolved to see it through. He would uncover the truth and bring peace to the haunted lighthouse, no matter the cost. The early morning air was crisp and bracing as Thomas made his way back to the village. The weight of the previous night's encounters lingered, but it also fueled his determination. He needed to understand what had caused the light to fail on those fateful nights, and why the spirits were so restless. Reaching the village, he headed straight for the pub. Mary greeted him with a warm smile that faded when she saw the seriousness in his eyes. "Back so soon, Thomas. What can I do for you?" "I need more information about the shipwrecks, especially the one involving Captain Blake," Thomas said, his voice resolute. "There has to be a reason the light failed. Something or someone caused it." Mary nodded slowly. "I'll help you however I can. The archives have a lot of old records and letters that might give you some clues. Eli knows more than anyone about the history around here. He should be around shortly." As if summoned by her words, Eli walked in, his face lighting up in a welcoming smile. He joined them at the table, and Thomas quickly explained his encounters with the apparitions and the message from Captain Blake. Eli listened intently, his expression growing graver with each word. "The spirits are not at peace because they don't understand why they died. If we can find out what caused the light to fail, we might be able to give them the closure they need." Mary nodded. "There's a story about the old lighthouse keeper, a man named Amos Harding. He was known to be meticulous about maintaining the light, but something changed in him. He became reclusive, and there were rumors he dabbled in dark practices. Maybe he had something to do with it." Thomas felt a chill at the mention of dark practices. "Is there any proof of this? Anything written down?" Mary and Eli exchanged glances. "There's a journal," Eli said slowly. "Amos Harding kept it hidden, but after he disappeared, it was found by one of the villagers. It's in the archives. That journal might hold the key to understanding what really happened." Thomas felt a surge of hope. "I'll go to the archives right away." Mary placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, Thomas. The truth can be dangerous, especially when it's been hidden for so long." Thomas thanked them and hurried to the archives, the sense of urgency driving him forward. The elderly archivist greeted him with the knowing look. "Back again, Mr. Blackwood. I believe I know what you're looking for." She led him to a small locked cabinet in the back room. Unlocking it with a key from around her neck, she retrieved a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and cracked with age. "This is Amos Harding's journal. Be warned, it's not an easy read." Thomas took the journal with a nod of thanks and found a quiet corner to begin his investigation. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, detailing Harding's daily routine, maintenance of the lighthouse, and observations about the weather and sea conditions. But as Thomas read further, the entries took a darker turn. October 12th, 1894. The whispers began last night. They spoke of power and secrets long buried. I must know more. November 3rd, 1894. I found the old books in the cellar. They speak of rituals to bind and control. Perhaps this is the key to understanding the voices. December 21st, 1894. The light failed again during the storm. I performed the ritual, but something went wrong. The spirits are angry, and I fear I have unleashed something terrible. Thomas's heart raced as he read the final entries. Harding's obsession with the occult and his attempts to control the spirits had backfired, causing the very tragedies he sought to prevent. The light's failure was no accident, but the result of Harding's misguided actions. As he closed the journal, a deep sense of dread settled over him. The spirits of the sailors were not only victims of shipwrecks, but also of Harding's dark practices. They were bound to the lighthouse by his rituals, trapped in a cycle of anger and despair. Returning to the pub, Thomas shared his findings with Mary and Eli. Amos Harding's actions caused the light to fail and trapped the spirits. We need to find a way to undo his rituals and set the spirits free. Eli nodded thoughtfully. There are stories of counter-rituals, ways to break the bonds of dark magic. We'll need to find someone knowledgeable in these practices. There's an old woman, a hermit who lives near the coast. She's said to know about these things. Thomas felt a flicker of hope. Can you take me to her? Eli agreed, and they set out immediately, leaving Mary to tend to the pub. The path to the hermit's dwelling was narrow and treacherous, winding along the rocky coastline. The wind howled and the waves crashed against the cliffs below. They reached a small, weathered cottage nestled among the rocks. Eli knocked on the door and it creaked open to reveal an old woman with piercing eyes and a serene demeanor. Eli, it's been a long time, she said, her voice calm and knowing. This is Thomas Blackwood, the new lighthouse keeper, Eli explained. He needs your help to set the spirits free. The woman's eyes bore into Thomas's. You've encountered the spirits, haven't you? And you found the cause of their torment. Thomas nodded. Amos Harding's rituals trapped them. I need to undo what he did. The hermit motioned for them to enter. I am Eliza. I can help you, but it will not be easy. The bonds that hold the spirits are strong and old. We must perform a counter-ritual at the lighthouse itself, under the light of the full moon. Thomas felt a mix of relief and apprehension. What do I need to do? Eliza handed him a small, leather-bound book filled with symbols and instructions. Follow these steps exactly. The spirits will resist, but you must be strong. The full moon is tomorrow night. Prepare yourself, and we will begin at midnight. With the book in hand, Thomas felt the weight of his task pressing down on him. As he and Eli made their way back to the village, the whispers of the spirits seemed to grow louder, urging him forward. He knew that the fate of the restless souls depended on his success, and he was determined to see it through. The lighthouse stood tall against the darkening sky, its beacon a silent promise of hope. And Thomas, the new keeper, knew that the journey to uncover the truth was nearing its climax. Tomorrow night, under the light of the full moon, he would face the spirits and the dark legacy of Amos Harding, determined to bring peace to the haunted lighthouse. The day of the full moon dawned cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of a storm. Thomas spent the morning preparing for the ritual, studying the symbols and instructions in the book Eliza had given him. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the intricate patterns, feeling the weight of the task ahead. Eli and Mary both stopped by the lighthouse to offer their support. "We're with you in spirit, Thomas," Mary said, her eyes filled with concern. "Remember, the village is rooting for you." Eli placed a reassuring hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You've got the strength to see this through. Just stay focused and remember what Eliza told you." As the afternoon wore on, the wind began to pick up, howling around the lighthouse and whipping the sea into a frenzy. Thomas could feel the pressure building, a tangible sense of anticipation in the air. He made his final preparations, ensuring that the beacon was functioning and that the necessary materials for the ritual were in place. By nightfall, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the windows, and the waves crashed violently against the rocks below. The lighthouse stood as a solitary beacon against the tempest, its light cutting through the darkness. Thomas lit the lantern and made his way to the beacon room, where he would begin the ritual. Eliza arrived shortly before midnight, her presence calm and steady despite the raging storm. She carried a small satchel filled with herbs, candles, and other ritualistic items. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. Thomas nodded, his resolve firm. "I'm ready." They climbed the spiral staircase to the beacon room, where Eliza began to set up the ritual. She placed candles in a circle around the room, their flames flickering in the gusts of wind that found their way through the cracks in the walls. She sprinkled herbs and salts in intricate patterns, muttering incantations under her breath. As the clock struck midnight, the full moon broke through the clouds, casting an eerie glow over the lighthouse. Eliza handed Thomas a small, ornate dagger. "You must draw the symbols on the floor and walls," she instructed. "The power of the moon will strengthen the ritual." Thomas took the dagger and began to carve the symbols into the stone, his hand steady despite the mounting tension. The storm outside seemed to intensify with each stroke, the wind howling like the anguished cries of the spirits. When the symbols were complete, Eliza stood in the center of the circle and raised her arms. "We call upon the spirits of the sea, the lost souls who seek peace," she intoned. "Come forth and reveal yourselves." The temperature in the room plummeted, and the air grew thick with a palpable presence. The ghostly figures of the sailors began to materialize, their forms flickering in and out of focus. Captain Blake appeared at the forefront, his eyes burning with a mix of hope and anguish. Thomas stepped forward, holding the book tightly. "I'm here to set you free," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I know what Amos Harding did. I know the pain he caused. Tonight we will undo his dark magic and bring you peace." The spirits wavered, their forms growing more solid as they listened. Eliza began to chant, her voice rising above the storm. The symbols on the floor and walls glowed with an ethereal light, and the room seemed to vibrate with energy. Thomas joined in the chant, feeling the power of the ritual flow through him. The wind howled louder, the waves crashed higher, but he remained focused, drawing strength from the determination in Captain Blake's eyes. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding flash of light filled the room, and the spirits cried out in unison. The symbols on the walls flared brightly before fading into darkness. The storm outside began to subside, the wind dying down to a gentle breeze. When the light faded, the spirits were gone. The room was silent, the air calm and still. Thomas looked around, his heart pounding. "Did it work?" he asked, turning to Eliza. Eliza nodded, a small smile on her lips. "The spirits have found their peace. The bonds that held them here have been broken." Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. The weight of the past, the anguish of the lost sailors, had been lifted. The lighthouse stood as a beacon of hope once more, its dark legacy finally put to rest. As he descended the stairs with Eliza, Thomas felt a sense of closure. The whispers that had haunted him since his arrival were gone, replaced by a profound silence. The village, the lighthouse, and the spirits could finally move on. Eli and Mary were waiting at the base of the lighthouse, their faces filled with anticipation. "Is it over?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. Thomas nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "It's over. The spirits are at peace." The relief and joy that spread through the small group was palpable. The villagers, hearing the news, began to gather, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and gratitude. The storm had passed, and a new day was dawning. Thomas stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the first light of dawn break over the horizon. The lighthouse, his lighthouse, stood tall and proud, its light a symbol of hope and resilience. He knew that his journey as the keeper had only just begun, but he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, and the future stretched out before him, filled with promise and possibility. The ghostly lighthouse was no more, its spirits finally free, and Thomas Blackwood, the new keeper, stood as a guardian of both the light and the peace that now reigned. The days following the ritual passed in a blur for Thomas. The villagers, now more welcoming and less wary, treated him with a newfound respect. However, despite the sense of peace that had settled over the lighthouse, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. One night, as he sat in the keeper's quarters, a chill crept over the room. The whispering started again, soft at first but growing louder. This time the voices were clearer, more distinct. They weren't the cries of anguish he had heard before, but rather something more urgent, more insistent. Thomas. He stood up, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. The air around him seemed to thicken, and the temperature dropped sharply. He knew then that his work was not yet done. Grabbing the lantern, he headed towards the lighthouse, the whispers guiding him. The beacon room was eerily quiet, save for the steady hum of the machinery. The light from the beacon swept across the room, casting long shadows. As he reached the top, Thomas saw the ghostly figure of Captain Blake standing by the window, looking out to sea. "Captain Blake," Thomas called out, his voice steady. "Why are you still here? We completed the ritual. You should be at peace." The captain turned slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "The ritual freed many, but not all. Some of us are still bound, still seeking answers." Thomas felt a surge of frustration. "What more can I do? I followed the instructions, performed the ritual. What's left?" Blake stepped forward, his form flickering. "There is one final truth you must uncover, one final act that must be done. Follow me." Without waiting for a response, the spirit moved through the wall and out towards the cliffs. Thomas followed, the lantern light barely cutting through the darkness. The wind howled and the waves crashed violently below, but he pressed on. They reached the edge of the cliff, where the remains of an old, dilapidated shed stood. Blake pointed towards it. "In there, the final piece of the puzzle." Thomas pushed open the creaking door, revealing a room filled with old tools and equipment. In the corner, covered in dust and cobwebs, was a large, heavy chest. He opened it, revealing a collection of old logbooks, letters, and a small, intricately carved box. Opening the box, Thomas found a key and a letter addressed to Amos Harding. The letter was from a man named Elias Granger, a former lighthouse keeper who had mysteriously vanished. The letter spoke of a pact between Harding and Granger to use dark rituals to enhance their control over the light, believing it would make them legendary keepers. But the rituals had gone horribly wrong, binding the spirits of the lost sailors to the lighthouse instead. As Thomas read the final lines, a sense of dread settled over him. The key was to a hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse, where the darkest rituals had been performed. He knew that to truly free the spirits, he would have to confront the remnants of those rituals and undo the pact made by Harding and Granger. Returning to the lighthouse, Thomas found the hidden trapdoor in the cellar, the key fitting perfectly into the lock. He descended into the darkness, the air thick with the scent of decay and old magic. The chamber was small and cramped, filled with arcane symbols and the remnants of ritualistic objects. In the center of the room lay a stone altar, stained with dark, dried blood. Thomas felt a wave of nausea but pushed through it. He knew what he had to do. Taking the book Eliza had given him, he began the counter-ritual, his voice strong and unwavering despite the fear gnawing at him. The chamber seemed to come alive with dark energy, the symbols glowing and pulsing. The spirits of Harding and Granger appeared, their faces twisted with anger and regret. They tried to stop him, their ghostly forms clawing at him, but Thomas pressed on, the power of the counter-ritual pushing them back. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the chamber went silent. The symbols faded, and the oppressive energy lifted. The spirits of Harding and Granger were gone, and Thomas felt a profound sense of relief. He had done it. The pact was broken, and the spirits were free. Climbing back up to the lighthouse, Thomas felt a renewed sense of peace. Captain Blake appeared once more, his form now clear and serene. "Thank you, Thomas," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have freed us. The lighthouse is no longer a place of sorrow." Thomas nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Go in peace, Captain." The captain saluted, a gesture of respect and farewell, before fading into the light. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound silence that felt comforting rather than oppressive. As dawn broke, Thomas stood by the window, watching the first light of day spread across the sea. The lighthouse, now truly free of its dark past, stood as a beacon of hope and peace. And Thomas, the keeper, knew that he had fulfilled his duty, bringing closure to the spirits and ensuring that their story would never be forgotten. The storm had passed, and with it, the lingering shadows of the past. The lighthouse stood tall and proud against the morning sky, its beacon shining brightly as a testament to the courage and resolve of its keeper. Thomas felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he went about his daily tasks, knowing that the spirits of the lost sailors were finally at peace. Word of his success spread quickly through the village. The villagers, once wary and suspicious, now looked at him with respect and gratitude. They knew the sacrifices he had made, the dangers he had faced, and they were thankful for the peace he had brought to their shores. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the sea, Thomas stood at the edge of the cliff, reflecting on his journey. He thought of the spirits he had encountered, the horrors he had faced, and the strength he had found within himself. The lighthouse, once a place of darkness and despair, was now a symbol of hope and resilience. Mary and Eli joined him, their faces lit with the soft glow of the setting sun. "You did it, Thomas," Mary said, her voice filled with admiration. "You brought peace to the lighthouse and to the village." Eli nodded, a proud smile on his face. "You've done more than that, lad. You've shown us that even in the darkest of times, there's always a light that can guide us through." Thomas felt a swell of pride and humility. I couldn't have done it without your help and support. This lighthouse and the peace we've brought belongs to all of us." As the last light of day faded, Thomas turned to the lighthouse, its beacon shining brightly against the night. The whispers were gone, the spirits at rest, and the dark legacy of Amos Harding had been laid to rest. The village thrived in the months that followed, its people no longer living in fear of the haunted lighthouse. Thomas continued his duties as the keeper, maintaining the light and ensuring the safety of the ships that passed by. He knew that his role was more than just a job. It was a calling, a responsibility he embraced with dedication and pride. Years passed, and the story of the ghostly lighthouse became a legend, a tale of bravery and redemption that was passed down through generations. Visitors came from far and wide to see the lighthouse, to hear the story of the keeper who had faced the spirits and brought peace to their restless souls. Thomas grew older, his hair turning silver and his steps slowing, but his spirit remained strong. He knew that the lighthouse would always be a part of him, a symbol of his journey and the lives he had touched.